Iniche booktube ikakane samgodu harebe alhamdulillah ifakakane bakakane mba maraba. Blessings booktube. Today I'm going to share with you my thoughts about a wonderful work of African fiction. All right, so this is about Bout de Bois de Dieu, God's Little Bits of Wood, by OUSMANE SEMBENE. And this is often attributed to being a Senegalese work of art. However, at the time of its publication, 1960, Senegal and Mali were actually federated in a federation called the Mali Federation. Now, of course, Sembene, as a Wolof speaker, is very much from the Senegal part of that. However, at the time, it was, in fact, a federal state, which we'll talk about at the end. I don't have too much to say about this work because I'm only about halfway through. Making this a blog as opposed to a review, not because I want to make more the usual personal comments about my African experience, but because I've little hope of finishing this before the end of August. And this is for my participation in the Reading Around the Globe Classics group. And so this is our work for July and August. And unfortunately, I didn't get to finish it, not because I don't love it. I do love it. And I have read the ending, which is powerful. It's basically happy is he who can fight without hatred in his heart. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but the end quote is something a bit like that. So I'll go through these points in no particular order. The one bit of background that I wasn't able to hunt up was about the legend of Gimba Njai, which is referenced a few times in the book. I wasn't able to find out about that legend, nor is it one that I already know. Now, at one point, Tiemoko does quote, sings about Sundiata. That one, of course, I do know. Sundiata is the original Lion King. He was a lame boy. There's a typical sort of, instead of stepmothers in many cultures, of course, it's with multiple wives, it's other mothers. So his mother is mocked by the children of the other mothers because they gather leaves for their moms, and Sundiata's not able to go gather baobab leaves for his mom. So one day, Sundiata has enough of this, goes to the blacksmith, says, look, make me this thing. And the guy makes him this thing, which turns out to be a brace for his leg. And Sundiata stands up and goes and rips an entire baobab tree, which, if you've ever seen them, are those huge trees that look like space trees that are featured in The Little Prince, and brings the whole tree to his mom for leaves, and that's the beginning of his epic story. Okay, so now another reference from the French part of this, of their heritage, is from Malraux. When they decide to hold a trial for the strikebreaker, the scab, who is the ticket collector, I can't recall his name. The precedent for this is set by this character who quotes the condition humaine, the human condition, which is a work by Malraux about revolutionary China. And it's the only reference that I found in here to any really sort of Marxist stuff, even though you would expect quite a bit, right, with a strike narrative. However, that's not what we get here. For those of you who don't know, this book is the strike narrative of the Senegalese Malian railway line that goes from Dakar or Thiès at this point to Bamako, actually a bit further on to Kolikoro. I, of course, know the Bamako end, having served in Mali, but I did live a year later, much later, in Dakar. So I know that side a little bit as well. At that time, the train was stopped. Unfortunately, it was not running. Later, a Canadian company picked it up and it looked quite nice, but it's already now fallen into a dilapidated state, according to what I saw online. All right, so through this strike narrative, we learn about, the characters, the strikers on both ends of the Senegalese and Malian end of this strike, as well as the women, the children. In fact, the women play a huge role. At a certain point, they march, they march on this whole scene, and just as the women marched to Versailles to bring back King Louis to Paris during the Revolution, French Revolution. One of the more the strike is described in a the metaphor that I found really beautiful for it is a battle of eggs versus stones. And you can imagine that the strikers are very much in the egg position. One of the details I found most poignant in the work was the time when the mothers are telling the children to stop eating dirt because the children are so hungry. You might have seen these swollen-bellied children in these starving parts of the world. They're eating things that humans can't digest just to fill their stomachs. I remember in Mali there was a saying, "Votre vide n'a pas d'oreille," empty stomach has no ears, which I took at the time as really metaphorically as a sort of, if you're worried about primary concerns, right, bottom of Maslow's pyramid, like hunger, you don't have foresight, right? You're not able to plan ahead or think big picture. But in fact, I was totally wrong, as it was explained to me by Malians in my village who had living memory of famine, that in fact your senses start to shut down as you don't have enough nutrients. And in fact, one of the dangers is as people go off, they have to go a bit further into the bush each time to look for even strip bark or anything that they can eat, little bush fruits that can be chewed but not really swallowed, things like that. Now these people know their countryside, for miles and miles and miles around, like the back of their hand normally. But because their vision is so reduced, they go off and they're not able to find their way back even to the village, which might be, within sight for a well-sighted person. So that's a really sort of gut-wrenching detail that I've always remembered from my time in Mali. So there's a little bit of time introducing us to the villains. Dujan, I think, is the name of the director of the railroads, very much a colonial, quasi-military figure, collaborator at Vichy. He thinks all the Africans can be bought, and you don't even have to give them money, just give them made-up titles. He thinks they're so proud. Bits of Wood, by the way, the title, what that means, if I'm not mistaken, the way my reading of it was that one calls one's children bits of wood, something worthless, in order not to bring attention, a positive attention onto them, evil spirits or jealous spirits or whatever might want to grab these kids, but if you make them worthless, then they're safe. And this is something that you can see in lots of cultures, and why there are sometimes these taboos against using names, and sort of these negative attributions are used often for that purpose. The conflict between Lamatulai and her brother Mabige over the allotment that gets played out, or that's in the past of the conflict of the strike that gets played out, where Mabige is very much the collaborator. He says God gave Tubabs the power. Tubab, by the way, just means red ear. It's a way of referring to white people. And this is interesting because she's called illegitimate, and that's why she's not able to inherit. But it's far from clear if she's illegitimate or if the inheritance laws in question are the traditional laws of legitimacy and inheritance or the Toubab, the French laws. So you have these tensions between traditional ways and modern state ways of doing things, in which one or the other has more or less prestige, and they can be in conflict, and so you can have these situations. And in case you think this is something of the past or something very much of these poor countries, I assure you, you can go to New Mexico today and you can find people who hold their lands by land grant from the King of Spain, which is why they hate to be compared to Mexicans. They consider themselves Spanish, and don't have modern title to their land to this day. And these things are still going on in like the checkerboard region of the Southwest, along with Indian lands, et cetera, et cetera. So this happens all over. So that's a quite interesting theme in the work. The trial, I thought, also was sort of interesting, as for some reason, SEMBENE doesn't go into the traditional ways of dealing with things without these kinds of trials, which would have been, at least in Mali, at least for the Bambara and for Fulde and Sorai, for the 5 or 6 ethnic groups that I know personally, have had contact with, the ways of solving conflict would be very much just low-level conflict with a simple mediation. Anybody could mediate. And then very much solving within the extended family would be the preference. If that's not possible, they might make appeal to the age group. The men are in age groups according to when they were all circumcised together, so that they might be called on. And then it would go to sort of the counselors of the chief, the elders of the village. Matter of fact, they used to meet in these toganas, which is these low shade structures, and Westerners used to speculate, why do they meet in these low, ceiling sections? Oh well, they used to meet in caves and whatever nonsense the Westerners say about it. But what one of the elders said at one point, he said, "Listen, sometimes we have to discuss things that are sensitive and people get upset." And he said, the younger men, they like to jump up, right? But here, they can't jump up. And I've always thought that was beautiful. And we should have our UN and all of our U.S. Congress meet in these toganas, and no one can jump up. Okay, so I'm coming to the last few points here. I liked the symbol of the sacrificial lamb of Mabigue's ram, Vendredi. And I wanted to think more about that name. Friday is what it means. But I didn't get a chance. But anyway, so the old lady who kills the ram, who eats, the little food she has, is dragged to the police office, which brings the women out, which begins the whole fight where the women set fire to drive the horse, the cavalry away, and then the fire sort of destroys a lot of the village. And you can see it all starts with this one sacrificial lamb. Okay, let's see, what have we got? I love this part where they talk about the dangers of citizenship. I bet a few of us have really thought about that, with taking very much citizenship for granted, unless we're in line for a visa to try and stay in a foreign country. We don't think too much about it, but does everybody have citizenship? There are people who don't have citizenship. Even here in Thailand, I believe there are some ethnic groups that don't have citizenship. But yeah, having citizenship can be a danger because it makes enemies of certain people, right? As much as it also includes you in a group. So I thought that was really a beautiful thing to discuss. So the last thing that I want to end on, is really the most important thing, I think, that I can add to the discussion about this, is coming back to 1960. So the African nations are newly becoming independent in the 60s, right? And all across Africa. We're very much in French West Africa. Um, the Senegal colony and the Malian colony was called at that time French Sudan, connected by this railway, but they're all administered by the French. So at the same time as we have this union, right, this railroad union, striking, so, challenging the colonial powers, we also have the country of Senegal with Leopold Senghor, who's also a great writer as well as a great African statesman, and I believe Christian, and Keita from Mali, who becomes the first president of the federated state of Mali, the Mali Federation with Senegal. And then it breaks up very quickly. The union only lasts from April of 59 to August of 60. And this Bout de Bois is published in 1960. So it would have been written a bit before, obviously, but still, nonetheless, I find this really powerful to think about, that there were many cries for a lot of independence leaders for more and more Pan-Africanism, to try to, break up these artificial borders set by the colonial powers. And remember, these are all multi-ethnic states for the most part, with various languages and ethnic groups. And you can see years later the problems that this causes, like, for example, in Rwanda, right? But here's a case where they weren't able to make the union work. For various reasons, Senegal depended very much more on a coalition of parties, whereas Mali was a bit more united in that way, so that was part of it. You have very much the power of the Sufi brotherhoods in Senegal, so Muslim leaders. So perhaps, with Senghor, there might have been tension there in Senegal. Don't know the Senegalese history as well as I know the Malian history. Salif Keita, by the way, it was said that he had a ring and he could bite the ring and he could disappear from wherever the Tubabs are trying to trap him or grab him, and then he could reappear. At one point, they thought they had him on a boat to Timbuktu, and he had his ring and he disappeared and ended up, popping up somewhere else. Many legends about Keita. But anyway, yeah, so one of these leaders is named Nkrumah. Nkrumah had the philosophy of something called conscientism, which was to take the best of the three traditions, the Arabic Muslim, Afro-animist, Euro-Christian, take the best of the three, leave the rest, not reject or accept wholesale any of the traditions, and construct a greater Africa along those lines, which is a concept that has so much power that at the time I was in Mali, I was actually helping a literary movement publish that called themselves the Mouvement littéraire du conscientisme, the literary movement for conscientism. So, so I find this moment in history where they're trying to create a African union between two states really, really powerful. There's a lot more reasons why the union didn't work, but I don't want to bore you with that. But I really feel like this is not insignificant historical detail to the context of this work about unions. So there you go. There you have it. A few of my personal thoughts and ramblings about Ousmane Sembene's God's Little Bit of Woods. Give it a read. It's a great one. And I'm sure that my Katja and Skelly Dagling and those guys probably going to have, if they don't already, a really great discussion video about that. So hunt that up. If I find it, I'll put it in the description now or later. Thank you for indulging. And Kamben Sony, see you soon. Alaka Sira Nyuman Nyuman Diame. God give you a great, great road.